All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Kerrison. I'm on the customer success team here at Commerce7. Thank you so much for joining today on today's Free Training Friday. Today, we're going to be talking about ShipCompliant, and we're going to be doing a deep dive into ShipCompliant and some of its core functionalities. We're going to be discussing tax rates. So majority of the tax rates that you get and calculate in Commerce7 is provided to us by ShipCompliant in various ways. We'll do a deep dive into what those options are. We'll be talking about the compliance check portion of ShipCompliant. So this is probably the most important feature that ShipCompliant offers, is that Commerce7 will send order data to ShipCompliant, and ShipCompliant will run analysis to determine whether or not that order is compliant. So they'll take into consideration things like licenses, information about the order, if the person ordering is above the age requirement, whether you have gone over the volume limits to certain states, and different considerations, and they determine whether or not your orders are compliant. Then ShipCompliant can also act as a bridge to send orders between Commerce7 and your fulfillment warehouse. So once it performs a compliance check and everything is deemed to be good and successful, ShipCompliant has the ability to push that transaction into various fulfillment warehouses. And lastly, once those orders are received by the fulfillment warehouses and they are shipped, those warehouses can upload tracking numbers and shipping information into ShipCompliant, and Commerce7 has a mechanism to pull in those tracking numbers from ShipCompliant into Commerce7 and mark the order as fulfilled in Commerce7 to keep both systems in sync. So we'll go into more details on what happens in these functionalities that ShipCompliant provides in the later slides. I'll also be talking about two scenarios, how you manage refunds and how it interacts with ShipCompliant, and then also common quarantine scenarios that you may run into. So quarantine is when an order, you do a compliance check on an order and it fails, then the compliance status of that order is a quarantine compliance status. So it'll be marked red, and you'll be able to easily see your orders that failed the compliance check with the quarantine compliance status. So let's jump right to the presentation. So first, I want to quickly talk about setting up ShipCompliant. I made a note here that to use the web service credential, this is by far the most common issue that customers run into when they're setting up their ShipCompliant integration. They use the wrong credentials. So I'm going to show you on our documentation site where to find the right credentials to set up your ShipCompliant if it's the first time that you're using ShipCompliant. So it's this article here, and it will walk you step by step in your ShipCompliant login on how to configure your web service credentials. So this is a different set of credentials than what you would need to use to log into your main ShipCompliant dashboard. So you'll go to account settings, manage users, you'll add a web service user, create a username and password, and then enter that information into Commerce7 in the ShipCompliant section. So I'm gonna navigate over to my admin panel. And yeah, this is just under apps and extensions. You scroll down and you have the ShipCompliant integration. And you want to set this to active. And the web service credentials that you just create using these sets of instructions, you want to enter in these two fields here. I'll quickly run through the different fields available, but we will touch on them in greater detail later. Shipment status refers to how you will like the order to be fulfilled. So the two most commonly used options are payment accepted or sent to fulfillment. So this depends on if you are using a fulfillment warehouse or if you're fulfilling in-house. So if you're fulfilling in-house and you're managing all that at the winery, then you'll want to select payment accepted. if you're using a fulfillment warehouse to ship out your orders, you want to select send to fulfillment. Order prefix is a prefix that you can add to your order number. So for example, if I add a prefix of CV here, and I send an order to ShipCompliant order number 12345, in ShipCompliant, that order number is going to be CV 12345. So this is commonly used if you are sharing a single ShipCompliant account with multiple tenants, so you can easily identify the source of that order based on the prefix. This one is a drop-down that lists out all the fulfillment warehouses that you can select from. So most likely the fulfillment warehouse that you're working on is available on this list. And this list is all the fulfillment houses that ShipCompliant can send order data, can pass through your order data towards. And if you're shipping in-house, you want to select in-house. Fulfillment account is a very edge case use scenario, so I'll skip that one. This one is if you want to offer FedEx hold at location as a shipping method in your checkout, then you can select yes and select FedEx hold at location, or if you're not, then no and leave this blank. The compliance type field, you have the option for a full compliance check or a level 1 pass-through. So this depends on the type of ShipCompliant account that you have. If you have a full ShipCompliant account and you're doing a full compliance check, then you'll want to select this option. If you have a free level 1 pass-through ShipCompliant account, just sort of using it as a bridge between Commerce7 and your fulfillment warehouse, you'll want to select level 1 pass-through. This is to enable the tracking number pull mechanism that I mentioned earlier. This is to determine if you want your point of sale carryout orders to be sent to ShipCompliant. And then this is to determine where you're getting your tax rates from. All right, so that's the brief run through on how you can set up ShipCompliant on your winery. All right, so let's talk about tax rates. So this is one of the core functionality and main purposes of the ShipCompliant integration, is that it provides tax rates for your orders. There are two ways that Commerce7 determines the tax rates to use for your transactions. We provide free rates from Commerce7. So this is through our partnership with ShipCompliant. We have a tax rate table that's granular to the zip code level. And this is a tax rate table that we keep up to date with through our partnership with ShipCompliant. So on a regular basis, we sync the rates to ShipCompliant's default rate table to provide free rates for all our customers. So even if you don't have a ShipCompliant account, or you don't even have a free ShipCompliant account, you can still get tax rates because we sync that data and have that within Commerce7 through our partnership with ShipCompliant. The second option is to get rates directly from your ShipCompliant. So if this requires a paid and a full ShipCompliant account, if you have that, as I shown earlier in this section here, you have the option to select where your taxes is going to come from. So this is the free option. And then the second option here is if you want to connect your taxes directly to your fulfillment or your ShipCompliant account. So some scenarios for that is if you feel like the rates provided on the free rates are not matching what you need. There's scenarios where wineries will have a grandfathered tax rate for their particular zip code or tasting room. And in that scenario, because we're using a global rate, if you're using the free rates, you'd want to use your specific ShipCompliant tax table, configure your tax table to the rates that you want, and then Commerce7 transactions will use that rate instead of the general global rate. So that's a common scenario where this might be required. Different types of rates that we send and we ask ShipCompliant for is wine, general merchandise, freight, and food. And I'll show you where you can add that on the product level. So on here, if you go to a product, you do have this field for tax type, and you have the option to select wine, general merchandise, or food, or non-taxable. And when you add this product to your cart, we'll make a call to ShipCompliant to ask for what is the tax rate for a general merchandise going to this destination zip code. And then we'll calculate against the price what the tax should be. And for freight, it's of course coming from your shipping rate. Cool. And if for whatever reason you feel like the rates that you're getting from ShipCompliant isn't the most accurate, ShipCompliant has a regulatory department that manages and ensures the rates are accurate and up to date. So if you reach out to ShipCompliant support, they will be able to provide you with either an explanation, or they will then communicate your feedback to their regulatory team and update their rates if they've confirmed what you're saying should be the accurate rate. So that's the path for correcting any sort of tax rate discrepancies that you might be feeling. Oftentimes they'll just come back with their resources and their research on why the tax rates is the way they are. And you can use that as a supporting document for your team. All right. All right, so now let's talk about the compliance check portion. So go back to the section here. If you're not seeing a compliance check be performed on your orders, confirm that the compliance type field in this integration is set to full compliance check on not level 1 pass-through. So a full compliance check will send the order data to ShipCompliant, and then ShipCompliant will run analysis based on those factors to determine a variety of different factors to determine whether or not the order is compliant. And they will respond accordingly with some details around why, if it failed compliance, why it failed compliance. Sometimes the messages are vague, but sometimes they're really helpful in understanding what action you need to take to correct this particular quarantine transaction or this compliance failure. So if it's a fail, it's a quarantine, and if it's success, then it will be sent to fulfillment, or if you're doing it in-house, it will be set to payment accepted in ShipCompliant status. And lastly, the option here to push carryout orders to ShipCompliant. This is optional, so you can uncheck or uncheck it. This is referring to point of sale transactions that you make at the tasting room. Shipping point of sale transactions will automatically be sent to ShipCompliant. Carryout is referring to just pickup transactions processed on the point of sale. So your guest transactions, your tasting room transactions, the carryout transactions, do you want those to be recorded in ShipCompliant? So there's really no need for a compliance check for those scenarios because, I mean, even before ShipCompliant ever existed, you were already selling wine at your location. The licenses are handled at that location. So you don't need to do a compliance check for carryout transactions in general. But if you want all of those transactions to be reported on in ShipCompliant, let's say you do all your reporting out of ShipCompliant, then you do want to send those. So that would be the consideration for this particular functionality. All right. Okay, let's go to the fulfillment functionality of ShipCompliant. So as mentioned, we had the shipment status field in the ShipCompliant apps and extension section with the ability to send to fulfillment if you're using a fulfillment warehouse, or setting it to payment accepted if you're self-fulfilling. So the flow is, if you're self-fulfilling, then you will generate your shipping labels using Shippo or ShipStation or whatever app you're using to generate shipping labels. Then the tracking numbers from that shipping label will be communicated back into Commerce7. And because Shippo and ShipStation isn't connected to ShipCompliant at all, ShipCompliant doesn't get, or that tracking number and tracking information does not get sent to ShipCompliant. So this communication is just between Shippo and ShipStation, or the app that you're using to generate shipping labels, and Commerce7. If you're using a fulfillment warehouse, then you process the transaction, it passes the compliance check, ShipCompliant pushes it over to the warehouse. The warehouse will then generate shipping labels. They'll pack the shipment, ship it out, and they will then upload information about the shipment, the tracking number, carrier, and ship date into ShipCompliant. And you can see that in your ShipCompliant order shipment details page. You'll see a tracking number and carrier and ship date to indicate that your fulfillment warehouse has shipped that wine out and has uploaded tracking information into your ShipCompliant account. And that plays into our next functionality, which is Commerce7's mechanism for pulling tracking numbers from ShipCompliant. So the way it works is it's a scheduled task that happens every 4 hours. And this scheduled task lasts for 90 days after the order paid date. So after 90 days, if we're not getting any tracking number, the system does give up. And it performs this check for all orders that are that have a paid status, that are shipping, and that are not fulfilled or partially fulfilled. So those are the orders that may have tracking numbers in ShipCompliant that we might need to pull into Commerce7. So those are the orders that we perform the scheduled task for. So we pull in that information as soon as the tracking number field in ShipCompliant has any value. So it's not a scenario that should come up often, but if for whatever reason your fulfillment warehouse fails to upload a ship date along with the tracking number, or fails to upload a carrier along with the tracking number, we will still pull that tracking information in, because technically what the system is looking at is the tracking number field. And as soon as it has any value, it will pull in that tracking number into Commerce7, mark the order as fulfilled, and it will stop this scheduled task. We won't check anymore, since that order will be marked fulfilled in Commerce7. So there is an option to turn this off if you don't want to check ShipCompliant every 4 hours. Let's say you don't ship using a warehouse. And that's this here. Scheduled task to check ShipCompliant to see if orders are fulfilled. So if it's unchecked, it won't perform the 4-hour checks. And if it's checked, it will. And lastly, once the tracking information is pulled into the Commerce7 order, the tracking number and along with the other tracking information will be populated in the fulfillment tab. In the history section, you should see that this action is performed by system user. This is how you can know that that particular action of updating the fulfillment status from not fulfilled to fulfilled was done through this mechanism of the scheduled task. And yeah, once the order status updates to fulfilled, we trigger the shipment confirmation email to the customer. out of Commerce7. So that's this email here, one of our transactional emails. Transaction emails. Order shipment confirmation, your order has shipped, and it will provide information, the tracking number that was uploaded into Commerce7. Okay, moving on. Yeah, now I want to talk about refunding orders and how that impacts your ShipCompliant account, what happens when you refund a transaction in Commerce7. So when you create a refund order, it creates an order with negative quantities in Commerce7. So it'll have negative quantities for the product, and it'll have a negative dollar amount as a total. And this transaction will flow exactly like that to ShipCompliant. It will have a negative value for the quantity, and it'll have a negative dollar value for the total. When you refund a transaction, the original order will not be canceled in fulfillment. So this is an important note to make, and make sure that your workflow and your team knows that refunding a transaction, a shipping order in Commerce7 does not automatically cancel that order to be shipped in your fulfillment. So your workflow should be refund in Commerce7. You don't need to take any actions in ShipCompliant, because the integration will automatically pass that negative order to ShipCompliant, which should offset the dollar value and the quantity value from the original transaction from a reporting perspective. But from a fulfillment perspective, it doesn't cancel it in your fulfillment. So you do have to manually contact your fulfillment or log into your fulfillment portal if that's available, and manually cancel the order that you just refunded. And for taxation consideration, your refunds will be recorded on the day the refund is processed. So for example, you have an order that you process in June and you process the refund in July. Those transactions will be reported on those respective dates and will impact your reporting totals for the respective month. So the first original transaction will be recorded in your June reporting, and then the refund will be a negative value that is added to your July totals. And this is the core reason why we don't, when you perform a refund action, we don't automatically cancel that the original transaction in ShipCompliant and the fulfillment warehouse, is because this is best practice from a reporting perspective, is that you should record when the refund occurred, and not just get rid of the original order and deleting it. All right, next I want to talk about quarantines. Quarantine is a scenario where once you do the compliance check, ShipCompliant runs their analysis and determines that the order is not compliant for a variety of reasons. It gets put into a quarantine status. So it's marked red. It should be fairly visible in your order list. We recommend addressing quarantine scenarios as soon as possible. This is a scenario where likely payment has been captured. In this case, it hasn't, but in general, like if it's a web order that's not compliant, you've already captured the payment, and it's in quarantine, so the order isn't going to get shipped. So the longer you wait, the longer that delay is for the customer. You've already collected the payment, and it's going to create a poor customer experience if you let it drag out for too long. So we do recommend addressing it as soon as it comes in, or as soon as you see it on the same day if possible. So an order gets into quarantine. On the compliance tab, it tells you why it went into quarantine. In this case, it's over the volume limit. You have the option to retry compliance, force compliance, and no compliance required. Retry compliance is what you would use if whatever the reason for your quarantine is, you can fix and you can retry it and it will work. So let's say you're missing a label registration. Then you go to ShipCompliant, add that label registration in, and now it's there. Retry compliance. The second time it should work because you fixed the compliance issue. It's not, certain cases cannot be retried, which we'll go into later. But it will work if you, in certain cases, if you can address whatever the issue is and then attempt again. Force compliance is if you want to just force this order into ShipCompliant without making any changes or addressing the reason for why it's quarantined in the first place. This works for some, but not all compliance failure. So I would say some of the less significant compliance failure, for lack of a better term, you can force through. So things like a bad address, for example, you can force through, and ShipCompliant will just take that transaction into their system. But some of the bigger, let's say you don't have a license to ship, you wouldn't be able to force through that transaction. It will fail again. And the last option is no compliance required. This is just completely bypassing ShipCompliant. It will take the order out of quarantine in Commerce7, but it will not communicate that order data into ShipCompliant whatsoever. Yeah, so I mean, this is in general if you want to, you don't want to do a compliance check with ShipCompliant and you want to maybe ship it in-house. You want to just no compliance required, get this out of quarantine, and then fulfill the order accordingly. That would be one scenario where that functionality might get used. All right. So I'm going to go over some common quarantine scenarios and how you can address it. This is the error response that you should expect to see from ShipCompliant. So if it's a date of birth issue, it'll tell you it has to be over 21 years old. You can then update the customer birth date on the order and then attempt to retry compliance. And once that birth date is updated to be above 21 years old, then it will work. The second one is the shipping code. So when you're working with ShipCompliant, ShipCompliant will only accept a certain set of shipping service code. And this can be found here if you go to ShipCompliant. The codes that ShipCompliant can accept is limited to these codes here. In this example, the shipping code used is GROUND, G-O-R-O-U-N-D, G-O-R-O-U-N-D, which is not an acceptable shipping type code according to ShipCompliant. So it throws back this compliance error. This one you cannot retry because the ground code that you have had is still stuck on that order. Because the order was processed when the shipping service was titled ground, that ground shipping service is going to remain with that order. And if you retry it, it will repush not the new service that you updated to, the correct one, but it's just going to send over the ground. So it's going to fail again. So in this case, you need to refund the original transaction and then reprocess a new order now that the shipping type code has been corrected, and it will pass compliance. Another one is not having a freight shipment item. So in our products, there is a section to determine whether or not this product is a shippable product. If none of the products in your cart contains a shippable product, then it will throw this error saying that you need a shippable product to send the transaction through. And same idea, you will just correct it. Unfortunately, similar to the shipping code, that non-shippable status is stuck on the order, so you would need to refund and reprocess in this scenario. All right. Oops. 3 more. product is not registered in ShipCompliant. So this will be the error that you get. Product matching brand key, product key is not available. So this means that the product is not properly configured, or if it's configured, something isn't matching up. So we recommend going into ShipCompliant, confirming that all the SKU code and brand key is accurate. And once you make the correction, you can then go back to Commerce7 and retry compliance, and it should work. Over volume limits, some states have limits to how many liters or gallons you can ship to that particular state in a given month. If you run into that compliance error, you'll get a compliance error message saying that it's over the limit and how much you're over the limit and what the limit is for that particular state. If you are able to address it, perhaps you perform a refund transaction to reduce the current limit. So now it opens up some room to process this transaction. You can retry it and it will work, assuming that you've addressed the volume limit concerns, the original volume limits concerns. And no label registration. If you need each of your SKUs to be registered in ShipCompliant, the labels also need to be registered in ShipCompliant. This error message refers to not having that properly configured. So you address that. This one is also a failure that you can select retry compliance for, and it should get you through once the original compliance issue is addressed. All right, so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. Gonna open it up for questions. Feel free to ask any questions, even ones unrelated to ShipCompliant. I'll be happy to answer.
So we did have a few questions in the chat just while you were presenting, but they were mostly related to feature-specific questions or specific winery-related issues. So I just wanted to overview that these free training Fridays are typically a chance to ask questions about platform functionality, but if you're having a specific functional issue with your winery, that's something best addressed in our support chat, just so we can give you some advice and help you out with our team behind us as well. So we would love to address these concerns with you in our support chat as well. So please just send us an email about that. But there is one question in here that's not related to a feature request. So ShipCompliant is asking, if not having a valid birth date can quarantine an order, how can this be fixed besides reaching out to the guest, which will delay shipment since they only have to check a box that confirms they are 21, so they are unable to actually enter their birthday?
Yeah, I think on V2 checkout, it probably passes through a different, I'll have to do more research on that one. That's a good question. I would assume that it passes through a different protocol. So it's not rejecting every single web order because it's missing a birth date. Yeah, send that question into support and I'll do more research on that and get back to you.
And I just want to confirm, is ShipCompliant Sarah from Arlington Vineyards? I just want to confirm so we can send an email to you. If you just say yes in the chat or no in the chat, that'd be great.
Is reservations. Yeah, so the last question is from Betty. Is reservations messing up and not including name as well as email our problem, or is it a problem with other wineries? This was an issue that has been resolved recently with reservations not pulling in the first name, last name for the customers. Yeah, I believe it has been resolved. So if you're still encountering that, we'll be happy to take a look at that further.
Thanks, Betty.
Thank you.
We'll go back to you on that.
Okay. 10 more seconds for questions. Looks like we're all good. Thank you everyone for joining. Hope you have a good weekend and have a good rest of your day, and see you all next week.